O blessed Benedict, you established a school for the Lord's service, where we learn to listen with the ears of our heart and to open our eyes to the light that comes from God. We have set out on our way with the gospel for our guide, clothed with faith in the performance of good works, and armed with the strong weapons of obedience. Be our guide and intercessor as we progress through this way of life. Give us good zeal, tempered with humility, as we yearn for life and seek after peace, so that supporting one another's weaknesses with great patience, we may prefer nothing whatever to Christ. And may we at last run on the path of God's commandments, according to your promise, our hearts overflowing with love as we hasten to our heavenly home, through Christ our Lord. Amen. It's a beautiful prayer, isn't it? I didn't write it, though. It was composed by Sister Paula Howard, so it wasn't me, but I love it. I just love it, and I like to use it. Okay, this morning we're going to talk about never despair of God's mercy. I have to confess that that is my favorite of all the good works in chapter 4 of the Rule of St. Benedict, that last one. Why is it my favorite one? Well, because I think it shows that St. Benedict had an incredible understanding of the human person. He knew us. He knew our weaknesses. If Benedict begins his list of instruments with our love for God and our love for one another, we realize that it is God's merciful love for us which will really sustain us and eventually bring us to our goal of eternal life. After St. Benedict lists all the many instruments of good works, 74 of them? He lists all these good works, starting with the greatest commandments, love of God and love of neighbor. He then proceeds on with other commandments and endless do's and don'ts, endless do's and don'ts, telling us just how in practice, in very, I think, very practical ways, how we might live our conversatio, our Benedictine way of life. That's what it is. It's our conversatio, our promise of conversatio. At the end of them all 73 of them, he adds that 74th one, never despair of God's mercy. So he's telling us right away, he knows we're not going to get it right all the time. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to do things wrong, and when you do, never despair of God's mercy. In the words of Joan Chittister, when referring to this particular verse in the rule, she writes this as a direct quote from Joan. When what Benedict wants is simply that we keep trying, failures and all, fear and all, the God of mercy knows what we are and revels in weaknesses that tries. I like that, don't you? Yes, I do. It's a God of mercy, for sure. So I think, in our effort, to live a quality monastic life or an authentic monastic life, we will fail. We will fail. I suppose you probably know that by now, don't you? That there'll be failures on the journey, for sure. But the true monastic keeps trying, doesn't give up, but keeps believing in that tender mercy of God. One of my favorite quotes is from the book The Mystery and the Passion, and this is a direct quote from that. God is mercy. God's mercy is not merely therapy for a few individuals beset by guilt. God does not dole out mercy like cookies only for the good, repentant children. God's mercy is not conditioned by our response. God is mercy. So wide is wider than we guess. Our calling is to live in mercy, recalling God's unmerited mercy. We absolve one another, enacting the good news. In Jesus Christ, we say, we are forgiven. So we look into each other's eyes without illusions. We are sinners, all of us. Yet we embrace each other in the mercy, that wide, wide mercy of God. That's a direct quote there. I love to think of God as mercy. That's who God is. And perhaps because I too am a great sinner and have struggled so hard in my monastic life to live these instruments of good works, and I have failed many, many times. I'll be honest with you. I have failed many, many times in my efforts to live these wonderful instruments of good works. But I have learned in my failures something of this God of mercy, and I can understand even more clearly why St. Benedict concludes his instruments of works with this one particular verse, never despair of God's mercy. Because I have personally experienced God's mercy over and over again. God's mercy, forgiveness, I have heard it said, was really, and I love this, was really the first fruit of the resurrection. That's interesting, isn't it? Forgiveness, or God's mercy, was the first fruit of the resurrection. Mercy is the key ingredient, I think, of Christian community, of Christianity. For example, Jesus' own forgiveness. He's on the cross. What's his prayer? God, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He's on a cross, being crucified, and that's what he says. Forgive them. They do not know what they do, what they're doing. And then after the resurrection, Christ's forgiveness, and this just always has kind of blown my mind, his forgiveness of Peter, who not once, not twice, but 3 times said, I don't know the guy. I don't know him. Oh no, I don't know him. 3 times. And then, what does Jesus say after the resurrection? Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Oh good, then, after the 3rd, do you love me? I'm going to set you over the whole kit and caboodle of what I've started. It's just amazing. Amazing, his forgiveness then. And then, of course, we also know of Christ's forgiveness, immediate forgiveness and mercy. We see that, but we also see it in his forgiveness of the one person who did not believe, did not trust in the mercy of God. Judas. Judas did not. He did not trust in that. Still, no doubt, I have no doubt that our God of the wide, wide mercy was awaiting Judas in eternity, forgiving him. I have no doubt. Living in the present moment with a God who is, which we've been talking about, I think forgiveness myself for my failures, accepting myself with my limitations, as well as accepting myself with the gifts I have, I think is the key to hope and to living, never despairing of God's mercy. As you know, I'm a storyteller. I like stories. And I have one more story to share with you, which I think illustrates how God uses each one of us in ways we don't expect. You may have already heard this story. I don't know. If you did, you'll just hear it, refreshed this morning, new. Okay, are you ready? Yeah. Are you all awake and listening? Okay, good. An elderly Chinese woman had 2 large pots, each hung on either side of a pail, each end of a pail, which she carried across her neck. You can just see her carrying this pail either side, which one of the pots had a a crack in it. Some of you have heard this, I can tell very expressed. And while the other pot was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water at the end of the long walk from the stream to the woman's house, the cracked pot always arrived half full. For a full 2 years, this went on daily, and this woman delivered only 1.5 pots of full. I can't read. I told you I can't read out of one eye, so that's kind of confusing sometimes. Okay, the woman delivering only 1.5 pots full of water to her home. Of course, the perfect pot was proud of its accomplishments, but the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfections and miserable that it was able to accomplish only half of what it had been made to do. So after 2 years of what it perceived to be a bitter failure, it spoke to the woman one day by the stream. I am ashamed of myself, and I want to apologize to you. Why? Asked the woman. What are you ashamed of? I have been able for all these past 2 years to deliver only half my load because of this crack in my side, causing the water to leak out all the way back to your house. Because of my flaws, you have to do all of this work and you don't get full value for your efforts, the pot said. The woman felt sorry for the old cracked pot. In her compassion, she said, as we return to the house, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers along the path. Indeed, as she went up the hill, the old cracked pot took notice of the sun warming the beautiful wild flowers on the side of the path, and this cheered its some. But at the end of the trail, it still felt bad because it had leaked out half its load again. So again, it apologized to the woman for its failure. The woman said to the pot, did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I have always known about your flaw, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walk back from the stream, you've watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my table. Without you being just the way you are, I would not have had this beauty to grace my table and my house. Isn't that something? I love that. And I'm sure even those of you who've heard it before enjoy just hearing it again. I think that is just so powerful. I think, each of us has our own unique flaws. Each of us does. We're all cracked pots, in other words. You hope you don't mind me calling you a cracked pot this morning. But I guess we're all cracked pots. All of the Benedictine sisters and all the outlays listening, I hate to tell you all, we're all cracked pots in one way or another. But if we will allow it, the Lord will use, I think, our flaws to grace God's table. We use our flaws even. In God's great economy, nothing goes to waste. So as we seek ways to minister together, and as God calls you to tasks that God has appointed you to do, don't be afraid of your flaws. God knows how to use them. God knows how to use them. Acknowledge them and allow God to take advantage of them. And you too can be the cause of beauty on God's pathway. You truly can. Never despair of God's mercy. Never despair of God's mercy. And after all, I think it's this is exactly what people like Benedict reap. Gertrude Loipe and Selma Felber, the women engaged in our foundations, they too were cracked pots. They really were. If you read some of their history and some of the arguing that went on among them and all the things that were happening, they were all crackpots, women who allowed themselves, flaws and all, to be used by God to bring about the Benedictine life in North America. They came here. They left home. They left their country. It always kind of blows my mind how brave they were. All that was familiar to them, they left it all behind, and they came to a new land and new language. They didn't even know the language, unfamiliar customs and territories, and they pushed into new directions with very little money. They had very little resources at all, but they had a lot of faith, and somehow they made it happen. Here we are, still here in North America, well over 150 years later. More than that, I don't do my math too well, but it's well, over 150 years. We're still here. And now I think it's, our own task, decades into this 21st century, to make sure the Benedictine life continues in this North American continent. We want to keep going here. Are we up to the task? I give that a resounding yes. I think we are. What gives me that hope that we can do this? All of you sitting here right in front of me. I don't care what our ages are, it doesn't matter. I've seen my own community. We can all do it. We can do it. In fact, I think it's because we have mainly a lot of hope. We aren't going to give up our hope. Where do we begin and how should we do it? We're all into future planning, aren't we? How do we do it all? The future is so unclear, and we desperately need clarity. We wish we had clarity and direction, or so we think. That's what we need. But I had a friend of mine, or either, I don't know if it actually something I read, or it was this one priest that I knew, who he was searching out his vocation and trying to decide what to do with the future. He was thinking of leaving the priesthood and wasn't real sure. So he took a year off and he went over to India to work with Mother Teresa's group and community, and he thought he'd discern while he was over there. And one day he was with Mother Teresa, and she came over to him and she thanked him for coming and said it was good to have him there with him. And she said, "Is there anything that you need? Do you need anything I can get you?" And he said, No, I have everything I need. He said, "But you could pray for me. You could pray for me." And she said, "I'd be happy to pray for you. What would you like me to pray for?" And he thought for a few minutes, and he said, "Clarity. Clarity." And she looked at him and she said, "No." And then she walked away from him. And he was standing there rather perplexed at why she said no and why she walked away. So he went after her and he said, "Mother Teresa, why did you just leave there?" And she said, "Well, you asked me to pray for clarity." And he said, "Yes." And she said, "Clarity is not what you need." She said, "What you need now is trust. Clarity only comes at the end. What you need now is trust." And I never forgot that. And I thought, isn't that the truth? A lot of times things happen and you do things. I mean, even my transfer, not sure, wanted clarity around that too, and I wasn't sure. And you don't really know until you do it. And then you've got to trust. Go with it. Trust. And after that, clarity comes. Oh yeah, I get now why I'm here. I see now what God wanted of me. It's just, so I thought I'd just share that little thing because it's so important now, and especially where we are in our process as Benedictines. Trust is what we need, I think, at this time in history. Strongly rooted in our faith, just as our foremothers were. Perfect? Are we? No. No. Having all that we need materially and personnel-wise? No, probably not. But trust is what we need now to move us forward in hope together. We, these crackpots, all of us, can, I think, work together in hope and in trust to make the future possible. To make the future possible. Never despairing of God's mercy. Never despairing of God's mercy. What else is needed besides hope and trust? I like the word resolve. We need resolve, huh? We must be determined to make it happen, to do our part, each of us, whatever that is, our part, each of us, and being faithful to our call to be Benedictines by living what we believe and by being authentically who we say we are. Being authentically who we say we are. There is, I think, an awareness within each of us as to what is fitting and what is not for someone professed to the monastic Senolytic way of life. I think recognizing our responsibility to cultivate our monastic instincts, if I could use my word again, has the potential for, I think, stimulating a very new enthusiasm, a genuine good zeal for the common life and the power it holds for our order, for our church, and for our world in the 21st century. We have to just be authentically Benedictine, huh? And always, always we remember that at the heart of our striving to live the Senolytic lifestyle is our search for God. Without that primary focus, the seeking of God in worship and in ministry and in our Senolytic life, we lose our meaning. So we have to keep that as our focus, our search for God. In our search for God, we are indeed united in hope. Hope, too, is the very aspect of God's very life within us. If faith is trust in the giver, a nice name for God, don't you think, the giver? Hope is openness for surprise. And the surprise of surprises is the God within us. That God within us. God is a God of surprises. Let me tell you, God of surprises. I've got that many times. And according to David Standelrask, if you've read his book, he talks about surprises, another name for God. Another name for God, surprise. Besides the giver, we've got God the surprise. He is a God of surprise, I'll say that. So be open for the surprises and cultivate the passion for the possible. Anything's possible. Life itself will purify our hope step by step if we live with a passion for the possible, and that we be open for the God of surprises, and what he might surprise us with. Our passion contributes to the continuation of monastic life in North America, which drives us on in our quest to do what we have to do, always motivated by our love for and our search for our God, and our belief that this life can lead others to do the same. So we are prompted onward in our quest to do the right thing and to make the right choices. We don't know, we don't have clarity now, but trust. Trust. And I know and I feel that in this whole process, we have our beloved oblates to help us on this journey. They're beside us, they're with us, supporting us, helping us on our journey, which is gives me a grateful heart for sure. So hope as the virtue of the pilgrims counts for, I think, both the stillness and movement. You know, the tension of hope poised between the already and the not yet. It is the basis for our understanding of that pilgrim's way. So stay in the present with hope, with passion, with resolve, remembering the God who is, I am, in the present moment, right? In the present moment. You can't go too far ahead. And like St. Benedict and St. Scholastica, along with our many Benedictine ancestors and our North American foremothers before us, remember that all of us are crackpots. God can use us in surprising ways. Be open to surprise and have a passion for the possible, living our lives with good zeal and with all of our heart, never despairing of God's mercy. And all things shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. Tells Julian of Norwich, tells us, huh? So may God bless each of you, and may St. Benedict and St. Scholastica intercede for us about a lively and meaningful Benedictine era in this 21st century, and how we are going to bring that about. And we are going to, you know that. We're going to. So never despair of God's mercy. Never despair of God's mercy. The question, one thing I would suggest for you is you might take some time to read chapter 4 of the rule today on those instruments of good works. See all the things he has for us to do. And the question I would suggest for you to just think about, do I truly trust in God's mercy? Do I really trust in God's mercy? Now, I have been speaking to you all week, giving you lots of suggestions for practices, that reminding us to, and I say us because I'm talking to myself as well as you. You know that, don't you? Okay, so, that we continue to prefer nothing to that love of Christ, the love Christ has for us. We also talked about relishing silence, again, beginning to have that wonderful appreciation for silence, taking time for that in our day. We talked too about stability, our faithfulness to staying at table, staying with one another faithfully. And we also talked about the value and importance of mindfulness, that it is so important that we always be mindful of this Jesus in our midst at all times, in everyone, in everything. Benedict had it right. Everything is a sacred utensil of the altar. Everything. And then we talked yesterday about reverence and how important it was to give reverence to everything, inside and outside, the little rabbits as well as the people that we're living with. And then today we're talking about never despairing of God's mercy. And I wanted to, we had a retreat some time ago at Ferdinand by Father now, Jerome Cudell. If you had a retreat with him, yes. And you hear how he's always telling us to, at least the one retreat he gave us, he was constantly saying, you have to remember that God is always, I am with you, I love you, trust me. I'm with you, I love you, trust me. I love Jerome, he's just a wonderful, he had COVID, he was very, very ill, but he's doing great now. But our community put together this little card, and I wanted to give each one of you one, so that you'll put it up on the mirror in your bedroom or something, or on your computer in your office. It says, I am with you, I love you, trust me. I want you to remember this always. And I asked Karen to help me here. you so much for your patient listening this morning. Never despair, God's mercy.